If you have already watched this introductory information, you can skip ahead no more than 7 minutes. Hello, welcome. I am predicting that singer-songwriter Paul Simon will die on August 1st, 2025. This time-stamped email proves that this prediction that Paul Simon will die on August 1st, 2025 has been known since November 9th. We can see here the timestamp November 9th, 2024. On November 8th, 2024, we received the relevant prophetic signs related to Paul Simon. And as I wrote right here, God was pointing to November 8th ahead of time because Simon's death will point to Revelation chapter 8, verse 1. And this is the reason why Paul Simon will die on August 1st, 2025. In short, the date 8:1 and 11:8 hint at Revelation 8:1 in the Bible, which describes a period of silence that was observed in heaven. Paul Simon's first hit was Sound of Silence. As I wrote right here, it is exactly 38 weeks between November 8th and August 1st, 2025, and Paul Simon is predicted to die at the age of 83, for which 38 weeks hints at. A dirty bomb is a conventional explosive that uses radioactive material. I am predicting that 3 dirty bombs will explode in New York City, in Times Square, Penn Station, and Grand Central Station. There will then be a massive evacuation from Manhattan Island. I am predicting that these 3 dirty bombs will explode on either August 30th or September 4th. I am also predicting that a dirty bomb will explode in the port of Los Angeles on September 4th. I am predicting that Tehran, Iran, will be nuked by the US or possibly Israel on September 7th, 2025. This will obviously be in response to the dirty bombs that are predicted to explode in New York City. I am predicting that Kamala Harris and Gavin Newsom will die in a plane crash in St. Louis as they are traveling from Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles in Busch Stadium in St. Louis on August 2nd, 2028. This will be during the predicted presidential campaign of Gavin Newsom. As a result of Gavin Newsom's death, Michelle Obama will become the Democrat Party's presidential nomination. Michelle Obama will, quote unquote, win the election over J.D. Vance on November 7th, 2028, and will become the president on January 20th, 2029. Donald Trump is predicted to run as J.D. Vance's vice president. This scheme to overcome the 22nd Amendment will backfire and inspire Michelle Obama and Barack Obama to run on the ticket with Barack Obama as Michelle Obama's vice president. She will then step down and Barack Obama will become the president again. It is predicted that there will be a massive Mary apparition on the beach in Rio, Brazil on April 24th, 2029. It is now recognized that there will be 2 massive Mary apparitions on the beach in Rio. The first of the 2 is predicted to be on March 22nd, 2029. These predicted Mary apparitions will not be secretive. They will be mainstream, worldwide news. Like all Mary apparitions in history, including at Lourdes, Guadalupe, and Fatima, this Mary apparition will be a demon pretending to be Mary. It is predicted that on April 26th, 2029, the key will open the bottomless pit and fallen angels will cross over into the earthly realm. April 26th, 2029 will be a symbolic beginning to the 5th trumpet judgment that is described in Revelation chapter 9, when the demonic realm collides with the earthly realm. April 26th, 2029 will be a symbolic beginning to demons pretending to be aliens. The demons pretending to be aliens will claim to be here to help us with our nuclear weapons. It is predicted that Pope Francis will be resurrected from the grave on April 26th, 2029. And it is possible that on this day, Pope Francis will announce that aliens have arrived and have made him the ambassador for the world. This will immediately give Pope Francis, the Antichrist, supreme power over governments of the world. April 26th, 2029 will be a symbolic beginning to a zombie pandemic and the masses becoming demonically possessed that will be facilitated through the thing, which is the mark of the Antichrist and 5G frequencies. April 26th, 2029 will be a symbolic beginning to the coming genocide politicide in America. The resurrection rapture event will occur on Pentecost on May 27th, 2029. On September 11th, 2029, there will be a catastrophic asteroid hit of Earth in the Indian Ocean. The greatest seismic effect of this will be felt on the other side of the globe, which is North America, and this will trigger an eruption of Yellowstone volcano and will cause the volcano in the Canary Islands to collapse into the Atlantic Ocean and send a mega tsunami towards the East Coast. It will also trigger the collapse of the Hoover Dam, which will cause a water panic in California, and many other devastating earthquakes. The day of the Lord, the second coming of Lord Jesus Christ, Judgment Day, will be at the end of 2031. The date that this video is posted proves that these predictions are being made ahead of time, as do these time-stamped emails and forensic notes PDF documents. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. All right, welcome. In this video, this prediction is being made that singer-songwriter Paul Simon, the famous singer from Simon and Garfunkel in the 1960s, will die on August 1st, 2025. The date that this video was posted on the social media platform that you are watching this on proves that this prediction is being made ahead of time. And so, likewise, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, do the time-stamped emails. I wanted to just make a quick video here regarding these connections, this foundational diagram, if you will. These two, what I mean by that is that these two connections right here have been known for years, as well as this one. Well, at least a couple of years in this case, because of this date right here. So it has been known that God is using Paul Simon for very important reasons in his big picture of signs for a few years. And here we have this connection to his death, predicted death, from this song and its release, Homeward Bound. Well, Simon will be homeward bound. In other words, he'll be bound for heaven when he dies. And this is also the theme of his new album, 7 Psalms. His most recent album released, for which he is on tour right now. From what I understand, his Quiet Celebration Tour, that's the name of his tour, begins with him playing the entire album. It's not a very long album, and it's interesting. I recommend listening to it. And the theme of it is transitioning into the afterlife. And that's what this diagram here is all about, with this predicted death of Paul Simon stemming from the release of Homeward Bound, because that's the metaphor for heaven being the home, the true home, and this world not being the true home for those that are true believers in Christ. I use the adjective true because there are many quote-unquote Christians, in fact the vast majority of quote-unquote Christians, are living in this world or have one foot in the afterlife and one foot in this world. But generally, you don't really have one foot in either. You might think you have one foot in heaven and one foot in this world, but not even. You are in this world, and most Christians essentially live lives barely indistinguishable from non-believers, in that they are living their lives for this world. Their careers, their family, their vacations, their retirement, their finances, etc. Most quote-unquote Christians do not get Christianity. They don't get the Bible or what Jesus taught and what he said. They don't really get it. And although it's clear, it's very clear in the pages of the Bible, very clear and very simple, it's a very difficult message. And, there are people that want to believe in a God and they want to believe in an afterlife. Unlike most people that aren't even quote-unquote Christians, where they don't want there to be a righteous God that they're accountable to for their sin. But there are people that do want this because they don't like the idea of just dying and going into the ground, or even dying and going to hell. And so they believe, if you will, out of a superstition, a kind of insurance for when they die. But they haven't really appreciated what's clearly written in the pages and what Jesus taught. And that's that the only reason for a Christian to be alive is to help other people reach the kingdom. Because a true Christian realizes that their life does not belong to them. Jesus, for example, said that one must be born again. But what does that mean? To be born again implies that there has been a death of the first self, of the first birth. To be born again implies there being a transition into a sort of death and a rebirth. Jesus said that, for example, one needs to die like a kernel of wheat and go into the ground before then one can grow up like a plant and produce fruit. Jesus said to follow him, for example. Well, where did he go? Jesus said to follow him and bear their cross. The place that Jesus went was the cross to sacrifice his life. That's where the Christian is supposed to go. But that's very difficult. It's not the easy interpretation that's wrong of what the Bible is clearly teaching and what Jesus is clearly saying. Jesus actually said to a disciple once who asked if he could go bury his father before following him. And Jesus replied with something very interesting. He said, let the dead bury the dead, and to follow him. Well, why did he say that? Because the truth is, the people in this world that are living in the world and are not homeward bound, are not living for the home that isn't this home, have had a sort of death and are now sacrificing themselves, literally sacrificing their life, meaning their prior ambitions and things they wanted to accomplish, etc., like I listed, career, finances, family, vacations, retirement, everything that normal people aspire to in their life to keep them going. These things now are irrelevant because the true Christian has had a revelation that they are going to die. Everyone knows that they are going to die intellectually, but most people don't really believe it. And they still have time. And so this is also why Jesus spoke of this parable of the sower of the seeds. The first type of seed is the seed that lands in the dry ground, the hard path, after which the crow comes and eats it. And this is symbolic, as Jesus said, of Satan stealing the message of the gospel from the heart of the receiver. There's the second type of seed that lands into the shallow soil and does not have the ability to reach with its roots the water, and so dries out in the sun and withers and dies. The last type of seed is the seed that reaches the good soil and grows into a plant that produces fruit. But the seed that withers and dies after having received the gospel message is as Jesus said, is symbolic of the receiver of the message, and they, for a time, are understanding, or rather, I should say, accepting of the message, but then fall away, as Jesus put it, due to the worries and pleasures of life. And so the ruler of this world, as it is said in the Bible, Satan, the ruler of this world, has designed it to keep people from the kingdom. That's his goal. And he does this through keeping them in the world, through the worries and pleasures of life. But the true Christian has sacrificed the pleasures and the worries of life and is living for the kingdom. But it's easier said than done. But nonetheless, that is the message. And as Paul said, one needs to crucify themselves on a daily basis. But again, that's where Jesus went, and he said to follow him. Okay, and he said to bear one's cross. He didn't mean literally put up a cross, nail yourself to it, and then die. He meant exactly what I'm saying, which is the sacrifice of one's life and their ambitions, their worries and pleasures of life. And the reason is because this person has had a revelation that they are going to die, which makes them Christian. Because a Christian has a revelation that they are going to die, but what that means is that they have had a revelation also that not only is it a short time, but nothing is meaningful. I mean, literally zero. Absolutely nothing. Unless there's an eternity. Because if there is no eternity, then one will die and then they will not remember what they supposedly accomplished. Because I met someone, for example, recently, and this isn't uncommon at all, who said that they were satisfied with what they had accomplished in life and they could now die. But they were atheist. And this is absurd, absolutely absurd, like to the infinite degree, what this person said. Because they didn't accomplish anything unless it lasts for eternity. Because they will forget that they had accomplished this once they have died, and so will their offspring. If that's, some people use the excuse of their offspring for meaning, but even they will die, etc. So even the planet will die. 900 million years from now, the sun will be too hot for life to exist on this planet. And so, okay, and we could even take it, extrapolate it in terms of the universe. The universe will eventually die. It has a lifespan also. As the famous atheist comedian put it in one of his existentialism comedy movies, if there is no God and no eternity, you might as well kill yourself. And that's actually true, and the reason why it's funny is because it's true. That's what comedy is. It's something that is not normally perceived, but is true. That's what makes it funny. And so it's funny because it's true, and it's the truest thing anyone could say. Because it makes no difference, absolutely none. It's not pessimistic, it's not cynical, it's just the truth. There's no reason to live unless there's an eternity. Okay, now if you are to argue, well, my reason for living is my family, my children, whatever, okay, well, not really, because your children are going to die too. Okay, it's just a temporary illusion that you've allowed yourself to believe to keep you waking up in the morning with something to do, an ambition. You know, animals can do that because they don't think about these things. But we as humans are created in the image of God, and we have this ability to understand death. Animals don't know that their life is meaningless. They just get up, they want to eat, they want to provide for their families, whatever. You can live like an animal, but you can't ignore it. You aren't an animal. You know that you are going to die. And you know that what you are doing every day is meaningless. Now, the true Christian has had this revelation and has understood the Bible. They get it. They get what Jesus is saying when he says to the disciple, "Let the dead bury the dead." The disciple that comes to Jesus and asks him, "Can I first bury my father before I come follow you?" And Jesus said the most profound, interesting thing, "Let the dead bury the dead." That's because the truth is, most people, the world, what Jesus is referring to, the people that are dead, that are going to bury his father that is dead, not his disciples, these people are walking dead. The non-true Christian is a walking dead person. They are like zombies, if you will. They are walking dead. They are going to die. That is the outcome, the consequence of living in the world. Death. Satan is the ruler of this world, and his power over people that prevents them from reaching the kingdom is death. All right, now, regarding the concept of hell that most Christians will tell people, regarding hell being a place where people are tortured forever, this isn't the Bible. This isn't true. And the person that has objected to Christianity based on this has a good point. And rightly so. Unfortunately, though, that's not an excuse for not learning the truth, that these Christians are not telling you the truth and what the Bible actually says. The Bible, for one thing, speaks of a second death. So people will pay for their sin Satan will have them pay for their sin, the consequences of sin, the wages of sin, as Paul put it. But then after the sin has been paid and justice has been done, because there needs to be justice if there is a good God, and we all have that inner need for justice, and so sin must be paid for. But once it has been paid for, they will cease to exist. They will simply die a second death if they're in that camp of people in the afterlife. There are 3 camps, not 2. It's not binary like most quote-unquote Christians believe also. Those going to hell and those that are going to heaven. There is a 3rd camp, and the majority of people are in this 3rd grouping, which is the people that will come to faith in hell, or Sheol, as it's put in the Bible, the holding place. Not everyone goes to the same place. There are basically good, decent people, but they're still sinners, that will have a second chance if they didn't have a fair opportunity to hear the gospel in this life and didn't fully reject Jesus and Christianity. And this includes people that were born before Christ, and also people in countries in this world where there's barely any news of the gospel, for example. But those who are born into the West, especially the English-speaking countries, because Catholicism isn't Christianity, and there are many people in Catholic countries that have not really heard the gospel. That doesn't really apply to them. They've had a lot of opportunity. So, Satan's power over people is death, and this needed to be overcome for people to live in heaven. Oh, and what I wanted to say also is that the reason for death is that if people were simply born into heaven, into eternity, it wouldn't be eternity. It wouldn't be heaven. Because what makes heaven heaven is that the people in it have been regenerated and are not like they were in this world before they were regenerated. What makes this world bad, a big reason, a big part of it, is the people in it, the unregenerated people. And so they can't be in heaven. It's a huge responsibility to have eternity. And it's a huge commitment. Not only is it a huge responsibility, but it's also a huge commitment. So it's not something that's lightly taken, and it needs to be made, a clear decision needs to be made. And that decision doesn't mean to intellectually agree with the concept of Jesus and, for example, then not afterwards being interested in learning what Jesus had to say, for example, like, for example, Catholics and many other Christians. It's not a superstition. It's not an insurance policy. And that's the thing. The agnostic atheist, their belief system is that, although not true, the core belief of their religion, and every worldview is a religion, and the agnostic atheist worldview is a dogmatic religion, and the core belief of it is that there might be a God, but there is no evidence for God. But that's a lie. It's not true at all. The evidence for the Christian God of the Bible is overwhelming and clear, but they're not interested in it. This is an excuse. It's an irrational belief system because they truthfully don't want or don't like the idea of there being a righteous God that they are accountable to. For them, it is icky to conceive of themselves praying to God every morning or something to that effect. They're not interested, you know. But anyway, that's the core belief. And so they tell themselves, well, if there is a God, I'll find out when I die, because there is no evidence for God. That's very similar to the quote-unquote Christian that is living in this world. They want this life, and then they'll happily go to the afterlife. And so that's why it's an insurance policy. That's why Catholicism is about having every single person in the nation, when Catholicism first evolved and emerged and spread, every single person becomes a member of this institution through even things like infant baptism, etc. And it's like an insurance policy. It's not genuine, sincere interest or decision making regarding where they want to be for eternity. They are living in this world. And so that's not really different than the quote-unquote Christian that is living in this world and living a life and has ambitions for their life, etc., but then as an insurance policy claim to believe in the Bible and maybe go to church once a week, sing the songs and, pretend to be Christian, but they don't really get it. They do not understand the Bible. It's a difficult message to understand. And that's not complicated. It's difficult to accept. So that's why they ignore these teachings of Jesus, for example. I'll just give you another example. Jesus had a parable in the 14th chapter of Luke, in which he said, essentially, count the cost of being a disciple. And by the way, there is no separate drawer for discipleship and salvation. The two are the same. That's the Bible, not the interpretation of Calvinism, etc. So the cost of discipleship. Jesus said, count the cost first. If you don't have what it takes to complete the tower, or if you don't have the manpower in your army to take on the other king and his army, because you're outnumbered, don't even bother. Don't do it. Don't even start. Just, in other words, just live your life. Just live for this life. Fall for the deception of Satan and have your worldly ambitions, etc. And not commit. It's a huge undertaking. You need to die. And so that's why saving faith typically involves some form of risk and or sacrifice that demonstrates a person's faith. James wrote, "For you see, one is not saved by faith alone, but through his works." Contrary to the doctrine of the Satan-inspired doctrine of Reformed theology and Calvinism, that is the mainstream doctrine of today's American church. And then James went on to give examples of Rahab and Abraham. And they, once declaring that they believed, demonstrated their faith through some form of risk and sacrifice. Rahab risked her life, and then she was saved. She risked her life for the spies, the Jewish spies, and then was rewarded with being saved from the destruction of Jericho. Abraham was deemed by God to be righteous, but then there's the second part to Abraham's salvation, just like there is a second part to anyone's salvation. And incidentally, this second part is described in the 22nd chapter of the book of Genesis, which was when Abraham was called to sacrifice his only son, Isaac. Abraham, because he believed, had faith. But what is meant by the word faith is trust and following through because of that trust. Abraham believed, he had faith, and demonstrated his faith. He followed through with his faith, trusting in God, knowing that God is God and he is good. And there will be some answer for why he is being called to sacrifice Isaac. Abraham believed likely that he would be resurrected. So Abraham, anyway, he followed through, and as he was about to sacrifice his only son, Isaac, the angel came speaking for God and said, "Stop, do not harm the boy, for now I know that you fear me." You see, prior to that, God didn't know whether or not Abraham feared him. It needed to be demonstrated. Abraham believed, but as James said, even the demons believe. Faith, saving faith, is not intellectual agreement with the concepts of Christianity. It is demonstration of those beliefs. Because the thing too is that Abraham didn't know prior to his demonstration of faith that he had the saving faith and that he feared God. It needed to be outwardly acted upon. That's the beautiful thing. That is why we are alive. We don't just get born and then one day make an intellectual decision about what is true or not, and then we get saved, quote unquote. Because no one is, quote unquote, past tense saved. People are in the process of being saved. People are on the path to the kingdom. And the Holy Spirit is there to guide them and to tell them when they are off the path. But no one is past tense saved. One needs to demonstrate their faith to have saving faith. And I realize this contradicts the doctrine of the majority of quote-unquote Christians today. But their doctrine is the bad doctrine that is the root of the bad tree that is producing the bad fruit. The Bible is very clear. God is looking for those who fear him. And when you fear God, you act upon your faith. The reason, or rather the fact that most quote-unquote Christians do not have saving faith and are living in this world is the reason for the end times. The church has reached a state where the overwhelming majority of people are in this camp because of this doctrine and their phobia regarding doing works, because Satan is very clever. He has these people believe that if they start questioning whether or not they need to do some more works or something to that effect, it means they are not saved. That's how tricky and clever and absurd their doctrine is. So when they hear me talking, they're actually squirming in their seats and maybe have been tempted to turn off the video because it's like the person holding out their two fingers in a form of a cross holding off a vampire or something. They're like, it's an anathema to them. They've been conditioned to believe that they question intellectually their doctrine. They're not saved because their faith is based upon believing intellectually the correct, precise doctrine. Which incidentally is kind of ironic or silly, because if that were the case, heaven is going to be filled with a bunch of white Christian males. Because it is only the intellectual largely the white male that has this solid foundation of this heretical doctrine of Reformed theology and Calvinism. Unfortunately, though, these white males are also the teachers and the paid preachers, which Jesus forbid. And the writings of John and Peter and the earlier writings of Paul confirm this, these teachings of Jesus. It's only the latter writings in Timothy that Paul wrote out of frustration regarding the direction of the church in the later years, so he decided he would institute some hierarchy. But these passages contradict the other passages, including when John says, "For you know you do not need a teacher." Jesus forbid teachers and preaching for money, and the passages that the pastors use for preaching for money are also taken out of context and isolated, and if you read them properly, it's clear they are, if anything, talking about receiving food, and it is a particular type of preacher, one who is traveling and needs to be dependent on being fed. Okay? And so the reason why Jesus forbid these things and said that there's only one teacher, him, is precisely because he knew that when the preaching for money monetizes the church and you have these teachers claiming to be the authorities, you would institutionalize these errors. Just look at Catholicism. It's absolutely chock full of errors to the point where it's not even Christianity. But the same applies to the quote-unquote pastors. The pastors are the problem. And today it is more dangerous than ever to be following a pastor. And Jesus warned of this. The first warning he gave his disciples in the Olivet Discourse is to beware of those who come claiming to be Christ. Well, the word Christ means anointed one, which, is Greek for anointed one, or is Greek for Messiah, I should say, which is Hebrew for anointed one. And there are many anointed ones in the Bible that aren't Lord Jesus Christ. And so Jesus wasn't warning of people claiming to be Lord Jesus Christ, because no one would believe that. And these people that do come claiming to be Lord Jesus Christ are not leading many people astray like Jesus said would happen. And because people recognize that they're in poor mental health. And Jesus was forbidding and warning of people claiming to be anointed by God. In other words, pastors, priests, reverends, and bishops, and popes. And so, anyway, what we have here is the reason for death and why we die is because heaven can't be the way it is. And the reason for death is that this life, or the reason for this life, and then why we die, is that it is a unique opportunity to make a decision, to have this contrast in this life, in this world, between righteousness and unrighteousness. But because of the necessity for this contrast in order to choose whether or not one wants to be with the righteous God that they are accountable to for their sin forever, or not and live for this world, this world therefore needs to be in a state that is undesirable for being a state of a place to live for eternity. It's only temporary. But it's required that this form of existence be the case now so that people can make the decision regarding God, the true Christian God of the Bible. Okay, and the consequences, or rather, as Paul put it, the wages of sin is death. There must be death because, like I said, people cannot live forever in this state. Otherwise, heaven wouldn't be heaven. Eternity wouldn't be eternity. So the consequences of this is death. That's Satan's power over human beings who have been created in the image of God, in their ability to choose between right and wrong and good and evil. and have a conscience. So, because of this power that Satan has over us, and God desiring for his creature to be with him forever, those that choose him, there needed to be a solution to this problem of death. And so the human species, the human being, needed a way to overcome death, and to do that required there be an immortal person. But death could not be overcome by a human being. Only God can overcome death. Only God is eternal. And so, because a human being couldn't defeat Satan's power over us, which is death, God had to do it. But he had to do it in the form of a man. Which is why he became a man and then died and then rose again in order to defeat death. This is Jesus. And Jesus is the first immortal man who is also God. And we can become like Jesus if we choose to follow him. But to follow him implies a death in order to be born again, in order to be regenerated, so that one can be qualified, if you will, for the kingdom, for the eternity. And so living in this world is a contradiction, because this world isn't the qualities of the eternity. The reason why one is left in this world after having come to an intellectual agreement, if you will, is to demonstrate their faith and sacrifice and crucify themselves on a daily basis in order to serve their master, their slave master. Because the reason for the metaphor in the Bible, the metaphor of all of this in the Bible, is a ransom being paid. The ransom is paid to Satan. Satan is the captor, and in the ancient times, groups of people would raid villages or ships and take people captive, hostage, kidnap them, and then they would ransom them for money. And the person who would come and pay the ransom and free the captive person would then typically be repaid by the formerly captive person. And that person would then serve their liberator and even become, if willingly, a slave, because we have this idea of slavery today that's not quite the same idea as in ancient times. Slavery was a part of life, and there were willing slaves. It was a way to live, survive even, or get out of a situation that they're in. And so these people would become willing slaves of their liberator. And that's the reason for the metaphor of the ransom. Jesus has paid Satan the ransom that is owed. The form of payment that is owed is death. But Jesus has paid that ransom. He's overcome death, and we can overcome death with him if we accept his spirit inside of us and become regenerated. We can get out of jail. We can be freed. But that person recognizes that, the true Christian recognizes that the ransom has been paid. They should be in hell. They should be on their way to hell. That's what they deserve. And so they are grateful, and they spend the rest of their time in this world serving their master, not continuing to serve the ruler of this world through the worries and pleasures of life of this world, as Jesus put it in the sower of the seeds metaphor, parable. Okay? So, and how do we serve the kingdom? Well, there are ways to serve righteousness, but ultimately, because this world has no meaning without eternity, the primary way one serves is through helping other people reach the kingdom. Sure, it's noble to feed the homeless, but if you teach the person to fish, is the metaphor, right? It's the ideal is to convert the homeless person, have the homeless person convert to the kingdom. And on that note, we'll get back to this video here, which is this homeward bound concept. So the true Christian is homeward bound, not living in this world. It took 40 minutes to explain this. Now, this is the theme of this diagram and these prophetic signs here. Regarding Paul Simon himself, if I didn't elaborate, there are 3 camps of people. And I believe Paul Simon is in the camp that most people are in, which is the opportunity, once they die, to accept Jesus. Contrary to what most quote-unquote Christians will tell people, the afterlife is binary and there are only 2 camps, those that are on their way to hell and those that are on their way to heaven. And they'll also say that those that are on their way to hell are on their way to hell for eternity and will be tortured for eternity, which is also not the Bible. But there are passages to support how Jesus will preach the gospel to those in Sheol, in the holding place. And not everyone individually goes to an individually different place whence they die. And so there are the essentially decent people like Paul Simon who have not really accepted, but have the favor of God, and they will be given a second chance. Now, I don't want to at all give the impression that that's a safe path to go on. Especially if you are in the West and an English-speaking country, you've had an opportunity to hear the gospel. There is a good chance that you will not be in that camp that will have a second opportunity. Those that will generally have this opportunity are those that did not have a fair opportunity or a full opportunity to hear the gospel and fully reject Jesus. Like, for example, also people that were born before Jesus or born in a country today where there is little opportunity to hear the gospel, etc. Okay? And so I just wanted to add that because I do believe that God has been using Paul Simon through his signs. For example, Paul Simon was instructed by God to make this album, 7 Psalms, through a prophetic dream, which I'll explain in a second here. So anyway, I just thought I would add that. I do think that ultimately Paul Simon will be homeward bound based on the things that he has said, based on his album, which is this theme of transitioning into the afterlife. It seems that Paul Simon believes in a monotheistic creator. He isn't a New Ager. He isn't a believer in an impersonal energy God. He's a believer in a righteous God. He is Jewish, after all, too. I don't know how much he is Jewish. And for all I know, Paul Simon is Christian and simply keeping his faith to himself. That's very possible. Okay. Now, okay, so what we have here is the release of the song Homeward Bound. I think actually this is the release date of the album too. And the album is Sound of Silence, which, by the way, is the reason why Paul Simon will die on the date 8/1, because it'll point to Revelation 8:1 and the description of the sound of or period of silence in heaven. Okay, so from this date, it is exactly 188 months to this date. 188 is this number that God frequently uses in his true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel, because it points to the 188th word in Strong's Hebrew Concordance, which is the word that means woe! Exclamation mark. It is used in the Bible in the context of extreme judgment from God, including in the trumpet judgments that follow the period of silence in heaven in Revelation chapter 8, which is what Paul Simon's death will point to. In other words, following the death of Paul Simon will be the fulfillment of these trumpet judgments and woes. That's what God will demonstrate or communicate with the death of Paul Simon and its timing. God will be saying that Paul Simon's death is a warning of what is coming. So that's why it's 188 months to this prophetic sign here, which was the prophetic reunion concert of Simon and Garfunkel in Central Park on September 19th, 1981. And it's partly because of the songs that were played at the concert. And the last song being, for example, Late in the Evening. That was the song that closed the concert. And the song Late in the Evening is known for its heavy use of trumpets. Late in the evening is a metaphor, as in time is running out for judgment and destruction. And again, the song is known for its trumpets, and that's why Paul Simon's death will point to Revelation 8:1 and the sound of silence, which is then followed by the 7 trumpets of judgment, which is also why the name of the album, 7 Psalms. Now, the concert is known for attracting a large number of people into Central Park for this free concert, 500,000 people. It was probably a record at the time, I'm not sure. Also, the name Paul Simon is equal to 500 in Hebrew gematria, and Paul Simon is Jewish. Also, this is the reason for his only solo #1 hit, 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover. That's another hint at this number 5 and 500 here, okay? And Paul Simon. It's part of this pattern of prophetic signs that God is using. Now, Simon and Garfunkel's last album was their 5th album, The Bridge Over Troubled Water. The first woe is the 5th trumpet, which involves a bridge, when the demons cross the bridge from the demonic realm into the earthly realm. Through 5G frequencies, enabling the demons to demonically possess people for, as it says in this prophecy, 5 months. Okay, speaking of 5 months, we have the 5th month here, and the release date of 7 Psalms, exactly 500 months after the 500,000 person concert of Paul Simon, whose name equals 500. All right. Now, the metaphor of a bridge over troubled water, is Paul Simon and Garfunkel's biggest hit. And that is the same metaphor as a door in God's signs. And a door is symbolized by the number 4, because the 4th letter of the Hebrew alphabet is the symbol for a door. And again, it is a door that will open to the bottomless pit through which the demons will emerge into the earthly realm. As it says in the prophecy, the door is opened with a key, and music is known for keys. Music is also frequencies, by the way, and it is 5G frequencies that will trigger the demonic possession of people who have taken the mark of the Antichrist, because of the things inside them that have been put inside them through the mark of the Antichrist that have found their way to the brain and will then trigger delta brainwaves. Delta is the 4th letter of the Greek alphabet, and The word delta comes from dalat, the name of the fourth letter of the Hebrew alphabet, which is a symbol for a door. Incidentally, the English word door is rooted in the Greek word delta. Okay, that's why the Seven Psalms album was released with its Homeward Bound theme, transitioning to the afterlife theme, 4 years, 4 months, and 4 days after the date on which Paul Simon received the prophetic dream, in which a voice instructed him to make an album named Seven Psalms. The interviewers of Simon who go to his studio are shown by Simon the framed piece of paper on the wall on which he wrote on after the dream, and it has a date. It is this date, January 15th, 2019, the date 115. All right? And that's because God is pointing to this first chapter of Amos, the book of Amos in the Bible, which has 15 verses. In this chapter of the book of Amos, and Amos has 4 letters, there is this repeating Hebrew idiom for 3 transgressions and for 4. The meaning of this idiom is that the tolerable limit of sin has been, or transgressions has been exceeded, and now judgment, destruction is unavoidable. For 3 transgressions and for 4 is what's pointed to through Amos 1:15, or rather Amos with the date 1:15 because of the first chapter of Amos that has 15 verses with this repeating idiom. And that's again the reason for the 4 years, 4 months, and 4 days, not only the 4 being a door symbolism. The reason how Amos is being pointed to is that Wally Amos, the founder of famous Amos Cookies, was the agent that first signed Simon and Garfunkel to a record label. And he did so by luring them into his office with cookies. Amos, famous Amos, Wally Amos, died at the age of 88 on the 9th of Av in the Hebrew calendar in 2024. That's because the 8th and 9th chapters of the book of Amos, the last chapters of the book of Amos, regard the judgment, destruction of Israel, and then its restoration in the end. That's what's happening now. The judgment, destruction is coming upon God's Gentile nation, and God is in the process of restoring Israel, where he will dwell for the 1,000 years of peace as Jesus on the Temple Mount. All right, and so the 8th chapter, verse 1 of the book of Amos speaks of a basket of summer fruit. Paul Simon is predicted to die on the date 8:1. Not only because of Revelation 8:1 and the sound of silence, but because of the basket of summer fruit in the book of Amos. And that's because the beginning of August is when you will see baskets of summer fruit. By the way, Paul Simon also has a song, April Come She Will, which has the lyric in it, August, she must die. It's also alluding to how Paul Simon will die in August. Now, it is exactly between the date of the release of the Seven Psalms album and his predicted death, 115 weeks. That's astounding because of the connection to the day of the dream on the date 115. Again, this 115 weeks points to Amos chapter 1, which has 15 verses. Now, the 115th, or rather the number 115 is the 37th semi-prime number, a number that is only divisible by 2 other prime numbers that God uses in his signs. And the verse in the book of Amos, chapter 3, verse 7, which is hinted at with the 37th semi-prime number, is the verse in which God says that he will do nothing without first revealing his secrets to his servants. In other words, God is revealing the timing of Paul Simon's death through his servants, to his servants, through his prophetic signs. And this contradicts the most quoted passage in the Bible, no one knows the day. The passage that is quoted the most because it is used as an excuse to not watch for prophetic signs. Obviously, watching implies looking for the Lord's timing. That's the purpose of watching. As Jesus said in Revelation 3:3, watch, because if you do not watch, I will come at an hour that you do not expect. Therefore, if someone is watching, they will know the hour in which he will come. That passage clearly contradicts the mainstream interpretation of Matthew 24:36, no one knows the day, which is taken out of context and mistranslated. Misinterpreted. The proper translation is no one has seen the day. It's a different Greek word than the word for know that's used just 3 verses prior. All right? So it's not no one knows the day, it's no one has seen the day. And also, directly following that in a parenthesis is how Noah knew the exact timing of the flood. His servant. Just as Lot knew the timing. His servant. And so the servants of God will know the timing. It's very clear. The doctrine of imminence is from Satan. It is false. And it is designed to do exactly what Jesus warned to not do, which is to not watch. And there are profound, important reasons why one must be watching, especially now. For one thing, it will light a fire under the torsos of people to get them to start serving and fearing God. As I explained earlier, God is looking for those who fear him. So, lastly, we have this connection. From the date of the prophetic dream to make 7 Psalms, which is an album about crossing into the afterlife, we have a direct connection to Paul Simon's predicted crossing into the afterlife, which is 2,390 days. Okay, and so 239 is the number hinted at here. We subtract the 0, and that is the 52nd prime number. That's because the word door is equal to 52 in simple English gematria. A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3. Okay, and a door is the same metaphor as a bridge. And as I explained, Paul Simon's biggest hit is bridge over troubled water. And it is in the trumpets that follow the sound of silence that the demons will cross over the bridge into the earthly realm. Not only this, though, God in his signs pairs the numbers 9, 23, and 44, which is what we have here. This 4 that's hidden in the 239 number pairs with this 4 years, 4 months, and 4 days. But this is also a metaphorical 44. The reason why 9, 23, and 44 are paired together is because of this. First of all, this is how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter, as the Bible says is required. And this is what makes what is being explained on this channel true and not a product of one's imagination and different and unique than everything else on the internet that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs. And if we think about it, one simple way in which God would provide a second witness for us is through pairing certain numbers together, such as 9, 23, and 44. And I know this because I have been studying his big picture of signs, patterns, and connections from morning until night for more than full-time hours for more than 7 years. And the reason is primarily the Antichrist was inaugurated in 2009. He is the basketball president and the 44th president, the basketball president who wore jersey number 23 in high school. So 239 contains that, the 23 and the 9, which pairs with the 44. Okay? One last thing is that metaphorically, Jesus is the bridge. He is the bridge between man and God through the ransom that he paid, as I explained. To go homeward bound, one needs to cross the bridge. That's why Jesus said he is the door, the way, the gate, the only way to life. To the kingdom. And so Jesus is the door, or rather the bridge, the cross. If you could picture a cliff, two cliffs, and a cross in between the two cliffs, connecting the two cliffs, one needs to traverse the bridge, which is the cross, to go and be homeward bound. One other thing that I forgot to mention here too is the symbolism in the reunion concert, which is this same metaphor of homeward bound. The reunion concert between Simon and Garfunkel is symbolic of the crossing the bridge and reunification with God. The reunification between man and God through the bridge is through the bridge. And so that's what the reunion concert is symbolic of. Believe me, I know far better than you how the prediction made in this video was derived. And more importantly, I know far better than you why the righteous Christian God of the Bible has given me a voice through this prediction. If you are a quote-unquote Christian or Muslim, this prediction was not learned through a demon. Be warned that blaspheming the Holy Spirit is the unforgivable sin. If you are a New Ager or New Spirituality person, this prediction was not learned through somehow tapping into the supposed universal collective consciousness. If you are a conspiracy theorist, this prediction was not learned through figuring out a supposed code that the Illuminati and Satanists are using. This prediction was learned through the Bible and through watching carefully the Lord's prophetic signs, which Jesus commanded all Christians to do. Besides proving that Jesus Christ is the Lord, the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove that the controversial things that I am saying in the videos on this channel are the truth. Therefore, a wise person will want to watch all of the videos on this channel. What I will also do is create a video or two that summarizes some of the controversial things that the Lord will prove to be true when the prediction being made in this video comes to pass. I will leave links to these must-watch videos in the description box below this video. Again, the purpose of this prediction, that is from God, is to prove these things that I will talk about. And therefore, it would be foolish to not watch the videos that I will leave links for in the description box below this video. Aliens and UFOs are demons masquerading as aliens and UFOs. Most people's spiritual experiences are demonic deception, especially if they are not a true follower of Christ. In the last days, many people who claim to be a follower of Christ will have spiritual experiences that are in reality demonic. God became a man and died a horrible death at the hand of the ruler of this world, Satan, and then defeated death for you, so that you too can overcome death, which is the price that must be paid for sin. It is time to repent, which means to change one's ways and turn to God and become a disciple of Jesus. Do not listen to or follow the example of most quote-unquote Christians. Instead, follow the teachings of Jesus, which most quote-unquote Christians ignore. Like Jesus, you must surrender your life. Put nothing ahead of Jesus, your Lord. Like Jesus, you must lay down your life so that you may live. As Jesus said, one must die first, like a kernel of wheat going into the ground, in order to then grow and produce fruit. And like Jesus said, one must produce fruit, or else like a branch or a tree not producing fruit, they will be thrown into the fire. Jesus was speaking to quote-unquote Christians when he said this. One must die the self in order to be born again. And like Jesus said, one must be born again to enter the kingdom. Like Jesus, you must sacrifice your life for the sake of the coming kingdom. It means to do work that involves some form of sacrifice and risk. To have faith does not mean to intellectually agree. You need to demonstrate your faith through taking action. To have faith means to trust in God's promises. Taking action demonstrates trust and fear of the Lord. The primary reason that the wrath of God is coming upon America is quote-unquote Christians that do not get what I have just explained. The only reason a Christian is alive is in order to help other people become Christians and make it to the kingdom. Do not be deceived by those on the political left claiming to be quote-unquote Christians. There is no such thing as a Christian on today's political progressive left. Jesus said, "Do not think I have come to abolish or change any bit of the law or the prophets of the Old Testament Bible." In other words, the God of the Old Testament Bible is the exact same God of the New Testament Bible. It is essential that you learn about the God of the Bible and his ways. The God of the Old Testament Bible is looking to see who will fear him, and to fear God is not the same thing as quote-unquote revering or honoring God. Through Christ's ransom payment, a Christian is someone who has been redeemed and freed from slavery to sin and Satan. In response, a true Christian recognizes that their life in this world does not belong to them, and they become a willing slave to Jesus for the sake of the kingdom. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more, don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. And don't only put the link to this video or another video on this channel in comments sections of places you typically visit, but importantly, put the link to the video in places you never visit, where people who don't think like you visit. If you are a quote-unquote Christian, nothing in terms of an evangelism tool compares to this video with its prediction. It is a massive bag of gold. Beware of Jesus' warning through the quote-unquote Christian that did nothing with his bag of gold and was banished to hell. Also, read Ezekiel chapter 3 and 33 for this same warning. If you think you might be spending too much time watching videos instead of working and sacrificing for the kingdom through handing out flyers and potentially helping hundreds of people in the same length of time as a video, my flyer is filled with amazing information that people need to know right now, and it points people to the video channel. Now is not the time to be handing out typical evangelical tracts that are largely based in error anyway, such as, quote, Jesus loves you, unquote, for example. You can hand out the flyer on busy street corners, put them on car windshields in busy parking lots, and put them in mailboxes. Just send the file to your local print shop. You can download the file from the website. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more, don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. It is essential that everyone immediately read the homepage of my website, asteroidprediction.com. If you are watching this on the YouTube platform, please note that not all of the videos are on YouTube. You need to switch to the Odyssey.com or Rumble.com channel, and do it now in case you aren't able to later.